Hello, my dear friends. This is Kristina Mandlakiani, co-founder of Mindvalley and the host of Mindvalley Book Club. And today I have my weekly interview with the Book of the Week by Mindvalley Book Club, no less. And my guest today is very wonderful because we had a little chat before the start of the interview, and I'm already in the good mood. As you can see, I'm smiling. So I hope this warmth and smiling will transfer to you as well. I want to make a proper introduction of my guest, and then we'll go and discuss the book of the week, which is Do You Still Talk to Gradma this week. When I saw this book in the weekly new releases, I immediately my attention was grabbed immediately because it's such a wonderful. Well, I like the name obviously, but I think the topic is also incredibly relevant nowadays. And we have been talking about polarization with quite a few authors, but this is a different angle. And as I was reading the book, I realized that I really relate to my today's guests and the authors' point of views and ideas. So I hope this is going to be an inspiring conversation, a necessary one. So my guest today is Brit Barron. Welcome, Brit, to Mindvalley Book Club.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
And Brit is actually a speaker, a very, a renowned speaker, a storyteller, and a pastor. Are you still actively a pastor? Because I read in your book that you have changed churches, right?
Yes, yes. So I am just a small local church here in LA.
And Brit is also an author and a writer, obviously. That's not Brit's first book. But we are talking about the latest book, which is Do You Still Talk to Gradma? Yes, the book, if you haven't read the book yet, as ever, I warmly recommend you to read it because we go through hundreds of books before we recommend something, especially the book of the week is the book that has been through the hands of a few of our pro readers. So as ever, I recommend you the book. It is a very, it's a lighter read in the sense that you read, because Brit is a good storyteller and a pastor, and I could tell it because it is a very engaging read and light read in the best sense, as in the language and the stories, but it is not a light read in terms of the content, in the sense that it will provoke you to think about everyday situations where, sometimes we go on autopilot and don't even slow down or pause to question what's going on, and is that the right way to live our life? That's maybe a bird's eye view to that book. But I have prepared a few questions based on your book, which will go deeper into the conversation, because the book talks about how we live in a very polarized world where a lot of the times we cannot talk to each other anymore because for a lot of different reasons. And of course, I'm talking right now from my own perspective of this question, but for many reasons, when we feel that we are on the other side of the fence, it seems to be even harder to talk now than, say, when I was young, 30, 40 years ago, where it was okay to have different opinions. We could still see each other and humans and talk to each other. I remember as a child, because I grew up in perestroika time, when my parents had guests over, they would discuss politics all evening. And sometimes they'd argue, and even it looked to me like they were fighting or shouting, but they were dear friends, and they actually still stayed in touch, even if they disagreed. Nowadays, and Brit shares this story in her book, you may even cut off a person in your life who is dear to you, who is important to you. And I think we all have had this kind of situations where we wonder, can I stay close to this person if I disagree so fundamentally with that person, and what to do? Now, it's maybe a little bit of a spoiler, but this book is going to make it so much easier for you to just chill and not cut people off left and right. So, Brit, sorry for this very long introduction, but I
No,
guess,
it's perfect.
the first question is, what brought you to this topic? And this book is full of Brit's own experiences from her own life, and you will have a glimpse of this wonderful human. But what brought you to this book to sit down and actually write it? What was this, I don't know, maybe turning point or decision point?
Yeah, well, I started actually working on the book in 2021, so a while ago. And, it was a few things, but part of it, it started out just kind of looking at social media and cancel culture and thinking, okay, if is this the best way to move forward? Like if we want people to evolve or learn something new, is this approach going to get us to where we want to go? And what started as like an interrogation of social media then expanded to like, oh my gosh, I think we do this not just on the internet. I think we're doing this in our real lives. And I think we're taking that like idea of cancel culture or like cutting people out. And I think we're doing it in like our family and at work and all over the place. And I really just started to ask myself, is there a way to have deep relationship in a place where there's also deep disagreement? And if so, how can we do that? And so that started me down the journey of this book.
Mhm. So I believe that you know what was the most endearing for me in your book is that you keep saying that we've all done that, and then we are so harsh on other people when they do that, and that humility
Mhm.
is just um, so sobering in a way, because we are all on a high horse very often when we interact with the world. So what I wanted to talk about is sorry, I just lost a lot of my notes and it makes me a little uncomfortable.
Oh my gosh, don't worry. Take
you
your
know,
time.
sometimes things like that happen, and you're like, it's maybe very good because there is a wonderful chapter about making the mistakes, that we have
Yes.
lost this ability of making mistakes, and here I am with my mistakes in my
Yes.
hands.
It's perfect for the content.
So what I wanted to say, I'll go a little bit with the book, although of course we won't be able to cover the whole book, so that's why you guys should get it and read it for yourself. But you started with the idea of living with the opposite feelings, and very often we have those opposite feelings where we love someone but we greatly disagree. So in Europe, just as a context, in Europe we have the war in Ukraine, which might seem very straightforward for a lot of us. Russia attacked Ukraine, but when you go deeper into nitty-gritty, there just the discussions about what is the way out, who made what kind of decisions, can polarize people. Or let's say the conflict in Israel. I know that me and my parents have somewhat different views on some of the aspects of that conflict. So how did you notice this dissonance between your two completely opposite feelings towards people who are important to you?
Yeah, well, I think it starts with the people who are like closest to you. And it starts sort of almost with yourself. And I remember I was sitting in therapy and I was talking about my parents and something that had was kind of disappointing to me. And every time I said, "Oh, this is kind of disappointing," I would say, "But they're really good people," or "But they're really good parents." And my the therapist was like, "Wait, do you feel like they can't be really good people and have also like disappointed you in a way?" And I'm like, yeah, I feel like it has to be one or the other. And that was like 10 years ago that that happened. But that started like me understanding, oh my gosh, I think sometimes in a relationship, there's two things that are true, like you said, like opposite beliefs. And so then when we come into a time that's heated, like politically or culturally or like family relationships, we have to be able to hold like, okay, I have deep, deep love and deep disappointment. Because in every single situation, you have big things like global conflicts, and then you have little things like I live in Los Angeles. And so there's a lot of people here who don't have a place to live, who don't have homes, who live on the street. And even within my friend group, even though we seem like we're all on the same page politically, we all have different ideas of like how it could be fixed, what we should be doing, how this is gonna. And it's important to like be able to talk about those things and to say like, I don't know, I think this, like, and you're my friend. It doesn't change our structure, our foundation of relationship to be able to have those conversations.
But sometimes it feels almost impossible to reconcile and to see the good side of the person if you disagree emphatically on topics which are important to you. In your book, you talk about, and sorry if I forgot the terminology because I don't want to be constantly checking my
Yeah.
notes. But you do talk about how justice is important to you, and sometimes you do feel very certain about your position that this is important. Yet it is exactly our inability to accept new information, which is the uh, which is the dead end. So, how do you make the difference between, what is that primary value-based foundation, which is important for a relationship, and what is that secondary layer, the why? Oh, sorry,
Hmm.
is it the why or the how? The
The
how,
how, the how.
the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
how. Yes, the how. So in your book, you have the what and the how. So how do you make the difference? Okay, in these points, we have to have the same point of view, but here it's okay to disagree because in the heat of the moment, sometimes it's hard to make the difference.
Yes, it's really hard. And honestly, also, this isn't like a perfect, we're not perfect, right? So sometimes we're gonna have these conversations and they're gonna go not gonna go well. But exactly like you said, I think it's really important to have a what, like this is my primary belief. For me, I say it's like liberation for all people. And it's broad because it changes and it's moved. And like you said, I used to be a pastor and I used to have these more conservative ideas. And then I grew out of them and then I had experience that pushed me beyond them. So I can't assume that right now I know everything I'm going to know. But I do foundationally, like my primary belief is that all people are deserving of dignity, freedom, and liberation. And so, as long as we have that same what, then I think we can disagree on the how and we can still like maintain that relationship, right? So, okay, I think, okay, we need peace in this region of the world. Okay, like that's a what because we all like believe in these things. And then the how, I think we can have those healthy disagreements about, right? And as we move towards something. And I think what's really hard, especially in my context here in the US, right now, a lot of people's politics feels fused with their identity.
Hmm.
And so it's like if you disagree on the how, it's kind of like you disagree about me as a person, or you disagree about that
Hmm.
primary belief. And sometimes that may be true, but if we can find that primary, okay, we want things to be better. Okay, we want things to be different. How might that happen? Then we can engage in some different conversations. But it is what I say all the time is like I don't think this work is for strangers. I don't think strangers change a lot of people's minds. I think this work happens at the dinner table, right? So even
Hmm.
if you have people in your life and you want them to be thinking differently and you want to have these conversations, it's going to be on the people who are already sitting at your table. It's not necessarily going to be like a random person off the street wearing, the hat of the candidate and you start arguing with them. Like I don't know how far that's going to go, but there's already people who are willing to come to your house and share a meal. And that's important for the work, I think.
So in your book, you do share a story of one of your friends who lost contact with his grandmother because even the what or the premise, the basic premise, they did disagree. So how do you navigate that territory where you feel because we sometimes a lot of us have parents from a different era, and I have some fundamental disagreements with some of the points with my parents. So how do you navigate that area? Do you try to convert your parents or explain, or do you just close your eyes? And it's not necessarily parents or grandparents. Maybe it's a friend who is from childhood and is still important.
Hmm. Yeah, it's hard. But I think there is so one of the main things I talk about in the book and that I believe in real life is that empathy really changes the game on the way we interact with one another. And so for me, example, as a queer person, I remember thinking like I've thought about my sexuality like every single day for like years and years and years and years and years before I ever told my parents. And I had so much time to sit with it and think about it and to go to therapy about it and to process it and to tell my friends about it. And I had so much history with it before I told my parents. And so when I told my parents, I tried to have a level of empathy that they're hearing this for the first time, but I've had years to process this. And so
Mm,
they might also need years to process and unpack, And
mm,
so it's not necessarily that I'm just like, okay, you can believe whatever you want, say whatever you want, but there is an empathy around the world is moving really fast. And sometimes new information does like jolt to our system. Like, when I found out about my own sexuality, I was like, oh wow, this is really, this like kind of shook me up a little bit. And so I have to imagine that would be true for my parents or my grandparents. And to have that empathy of space of, this took me a while to understand. It may take you a while to understand. And I'd like to be on that journey with you instead of, if you don't get this, you're out of my life.
Mm. Well, as I was reading your book, I think this topic is very, very prominent that you just mentioned that
Mhm.
you discuss all the situations of the world, and then you turn back and you say, but then I and you share a story where you have pretty much gone through the same process. And a thought that was crossing my mind is the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So this book
Mm,
really reads like you're seeing the whole world through your own experience and through the lens that I have done that too at some point, or like you're sharing
yeah.
this story parable. I think it's from the Bible where you say we all have been in a position of every single character in this story. The
Yes.
victim, the bypasses who don't care, and the one who helps. So guys, if I were to characterize this book very shortly, I think it's a mirror, literally. You
Mm,
read you,
yeah.
you read the book and you start thinking of your own experiences in life because I had also when I me and my husband decided to divorce, I had a somewhat similar experience with my parents, as in it was coming to us, but when I shared it with them, it took them some time to accept it, and we did have some period where we chose not to speak to each other, not because we didn't want each other in each other's life, but because it was just too emotionally charged. So
Yes. Hmm.
as I say, it's a mirror.
Yes. Yeah. And
But sorry, I have to open my notes because I run away with the thought, and then I wanted to uh, what I wanted to ask about is so it's connected also to this what we were just talking about. You were talking about progressive amnesia. Can you explain this concept to the people who haven't read the book? Because I think it was a very interesting new concept I haven't heard of before.
yeah. Yeah. So progressive amnesia is the term I use to describe um, what it feels like when we learn something new and then we kind of pretend that we always knew it. And so I think for a lot of us, when our beliefs have expanded and evolved and grown, maybe it feels more like us. But it's so important to remember the time before we knew what we know now, right? Because oh my gosh, if you look back at like my journal from 15 years ago or my diary, like it would be so embarrassing because I just thought the world worked fundamentally in a different way than I think it works now. And I think that's good and that's healthy, but I have to stay connected to that person because it, again, gives me a sense of empathy for the people who may still be there, right? And so I think for me in my own story, I'm tempted to look at maybe certain conservative religious groups that I've been a part of and just be like, how could they do that? That's so different. That's so weird. That's so bad. But I'm like, oh my gosh, but I did that. Right. And I have to remember that I did that, not because that makes it okay. Like I always say, empathy is not an endorsement, right? Like we don't empathize and say and agree. Like we empathize to remind ourselves of the humanity and the process of both ourselves and the people on the other side of our thing. And progressive amnesia is a big barrier to that because it allows us to pretend like, oh, I've always known this, or I was born with this information, or I've always experienced this. But for everyone on earth, that's just not true, right? We learn as we go.
I like how in this chapter of your book you talk about how you have to stay with the pain because if you don't uh, transform it, you will pass it on to someone else. So I guess the question that I ask myself as I read your book is, where did you get all this wisdom? I know you're a pastor, and maybe there is some divine intervention in that, but I read a lot of books, and honestly, I'm constantly wondering. So where did this wisdom come from?
That's a great question. I think one of the things I have a tattoo on my arm that says "Stay awake," and I always think about it because so much of life is offering us opportunities as long as we're willing to see them.
Hmm.
And sometimes, especially in our current culture, just with like technological advances and all these things, we have an ability to feel something or maybe like notice something and then forget about it, like go on our phones or like do these things. But staying present to all the feelings, I think really builds just a more well-rounded lens to see the world. And so I think a lot of what I've tried to do in life is really just pay attention.
Hmm.
And stay close to all the versions of myself. And anytime I feel something, and I always say the feeling that I should be most suspicious of is self-righteousness. So
Hmm.
whenever I start to feel like, oh, well, at least I'm better than them, or oh, I finally have it right, or I'm finally like, that should like, I should be suspicious and be like, okay, I think I need to examine something. Like, why am I feeling like that? Because what I want to be in the world is open and sort of constantly learning and growing. And I think if you're not looking back at your diaries and your journals from 10 years ago and kind of giggling, then you might not be paying enough attention.
Mm. And your transformation journey has been very dramatic, I would say, right? Because
Yeah.
you have started from a completely different place where you are right now. So, how do you feel about that younger version of Brit with whom you might have had a pretty intense argument now, maybe?
Yeah, that's the funniest part is I'm like, when I think about the people in my life now who I have the most difficult time seeing eye to eye with, my younger version would absolutely be that person. Politically, socially, like all religiously, like we would not be good friends. Um, and so I'm like, we, I think she would see me walking down the street and be like, "What the heck?" You know what I mean? What's with the tattoos? What's with the hair? Like, and so it's just a beautiful reminder to me that as I have people in my life who saw me then and walked with me until this point, then I could be that person in someone's life who sees them here and walks with them, whatever that journey looks like. Because I think you're right, it has been kind of a dramatic um, 20 years, but I'm like, it might even be a more dramatic next 20. I don't know, right? And so I have to be open to that journey. And I think, I sometimes there's a sense of urgency and the stakes feel really high, especially politically right now, where I am. And I have to always remind people that change never bends itself to our timeline. It just happens as it happens. And
Mhm.
so I think a lot of us put a lot of pressure on like one conversation or one moment or one Instagram post. And we were like, okay, I'm going to send my parents this flow chart and they're going to radically change their political beliefs,
Mhm.
right? But it usually doesn't work like that. It's years of conversations. It's dinners and coffees, and maybe we have to take some short breaks because we don't understand it right now, and then we can come back together and we have that's how change works, right? That's how it worked for most of us. I didn't
Mhm.
wake up one day completely different. I had this like long journey, and so I keep that in my mind of I know that feels like urgent and everyone needs to change their minds right now and we need to fix everything right now, but that's just not how change works. And so I think reminding ourselves we can slow it down and be in process with people.
So there's one unsettling point about this whole idea that, the younger version of you was so different, and now I hope and I believe you like yourself now more than yourself then. But when you think into the future, you just mentioned 20 years from now, isn't that a little unsettling and scary? So how am I going to change? What's going to be so different about me? What if I'm imperfect right now? So,
Yeah. I mean, is it scary or is it exciting? Because if I think about how much I've changed from then till now, it's only good things, right? Like I love it. I love all the knowledge. So I'm like, if there's more for me that I don't even know yet, I'm kind of I'm kind of into it,
Mhm.
right? That could be an exciting thing because to think that I'm 39 years old, to think that at 39 I've learned it all and I'm gonna stay here. I mean, it's kind of crazy, right? There has to be more. And so I think and when I at the time, like if you'd have asked me 20 years ago, like, do you love who you are? I would have been like, yeah. Um, and I just didn't have as deep of a well of understanding about myself. And now the well is deeper and I'm like, oh, I really love who I am. But to imagine that the well could potentially get even deeper, right? Then I could
Mm.
really, really, really love love who I am. And
So,
so I don't know if it can be scary or exciting.
uh, you mentioned that, and maybe I'll take a little liberty to to judge you without knowing you properly. But it does feel that you have a very profound compassion and love for yourself. At least that's what you can read between the lines. How do you cultivate that good relationship with yourself, considering that you had to come to peace with some aspects of yourself, like your sexuality, for example, or your relationship with the church that was such an important part of your childhood? So how do you cultivate that healthy relationship with yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think um, I have my dad used to always say, you can't give what you don't have. And so I think in my quest to live compassionately and empathetically towards other people, I realized that I have to do that for me first, or I'll never be able to do it for someone else. If you can't do it for yourself, you can't do it for anyone. And so the way that I wanted to show up in the world, um, compassionate, kind, loving, empathetic, that I had to figure out how to do that for me first. And just healthy practices of this the same way that I think it's okay for other people to change their mind, it's okay for me too, right? And so this journey that I've been on, there's just so much empathy and looking back and like thanking those previous versions and being like, oh, I know that you did that because you were trying to feel safe, or I know, right? And just like inviting that empathy and compassion into the conversation and not being like, oh no, I need to make up for that bad version of myself, being like, oh my gosh, we were trying our best, we were doing our best, and we didn't have all the information and we didn't have all the experience, and now we have more, and so we can do more. But I think there's a gentleness I want to show up in the world with, and that's impossible unless I can show up for myself with that as well.
So, for those of you who are planning to read the book, and I assume, knowing Mindvalley audience, that our Mindvalley people will truly enjoy it because you speak our language and cover some topics which are very important for our audience, including what we were talking about right now. The book is, though, on social issues as well, and quite strongly, and
Mhm.
there are political views, by the way. So I'm just letting you know straight away. And they're very honestly expressed. And it's leading me to the next question. So with your compassion and patience, obviously with yourself and the world, you still have pretty strong views about justice. And another thing that you can read between the lines is how passionately you care about what's happening, at least in US, because there's a lot of US there are a lot of US events which you discuss in the book. So how do
Mhm.
you reconcile that patience and understanding with passion and desire to change things?
Yeah, it's definitely a tricky balance, to be honest. And there are seasons where I look back and reflect and I'm like, okay, I don't know if that was the best approach. But, it's sort of like you said, maybe if I could uh, draw a line, it's kind of like you said with your parents and getting divorced of like you want to have this relationship, you want to be in this thing, but sometimes you have to take a break. And so I think that I care so much about justice and I care so much about liberation and freedom of people. And my context that I've grown up in has disappointed me a lot in that way, um, in our political structures and all these things. And I have a very strong point of view on that. And I can also recognize that even the way I think justice shows up in the world has changed. And so I have this like this passion and this drive that will probably never go away because I've had it for as long as I can remember. And I have this like evolving perspective of humanity. And the two of those, I spend a lot of time trying to get them to, to dance well because um I've seen I've done both, right? Like I've gone extreme and I've gone maybe too passive. And so I think I do care so much and I have so much passion. And I do believe that empathy and compassion and kindness will move the needle. And so I have to just get those two to dance sometimes.
So from the personal point of view, obviously, empathy and compassion helps you to stay open to, to changes, to transformation. But the world nowadays is a little too angry, maybe. Uh,
Yeah.
so, uh, so, and I don't want to call it weakness because it isn't. But sometimes when you are face to face with someone who is very passionate, angry, and loud, how do you stay empathetic and compassionate with this kind of uh, environment around you?
Yeah. Well, and I just have to say, I don't always. That's what I try my best, but I definitely am also a person, and sometimes I just get angry right with them. But I think in today's world, the loudest voices are not the most compassionate, and the loudest voices
Yeah.
are not the most empathy. The loudest voices that we're like constantly hearing are the angry ones and the mad, and they're on this side and they're angry, and they're on this side and they're angry, and they're like yelling, and everyone is like screaming for our attention. And so I think it's important now more than ever to be able to turn down the noise and to have your own practice, right? That is going to like center and ground yourself in that. Like I have to remind myself constantly, like, okay, I think maybe these people screaming, like maybe I kind of agree with like foundational principles of what they're saying, but we don't need to, I don't want to scream, like, why are you screaming at me? Or these people are screaming at me, but I don't think that means that everyone over here is like bad. And you know what I mean? I think we have to sort through the noise because, and I think this has been true for a lot of history, if I'm being honest, that the loudest voices are rarely the ones that we need to be paying the most attention to, right?
Mhm.
Um, I think there's some good voices that are just, we hear them when we turn down the noise a little bit. And one of those, first and foremost, is our own.
Mm. You have a very important message. I just hope that it doesn't get drowned by the noise. Now, the question I have to ask, since your book does have strong messages from the social issues point of view, but I also recognize that the book must have been written a while ago and then printed and published and launched. Uh, how do you feel now with the explosive changes that are happening in the US literally just weeks ago? Has anything changed, or would you have added something to this book?
Oh my gosh. That's so funny. I so books take a long time. And so
Yes.
when they told me it was going to come out in October 2024, I said to the publisher in an email, I said, I just am afraid that by that time we're not going to be dealing with any of these issues anymore.
Hmm.
Okay, so I was definitely, this is a prime example of me being wrong, like in real time. Um, and to be honest, no, I think had I known what was about to happen, I don't know. I think I might have even been nervous to put it out. Um, but I think the way it all worked out, I wouldn't change anything. And I think it's more important than I even thought it would be.
It is definitely very relevant right now. So, guys, actually, Britt, you can show the book too. You have a whole stack
Oh,
there.
yes.
Yeah, this is the book. I really love the title because I've seen so much of that. Unfortunately, when the
Hmm.
war started here, both Israel and Ukraine, both wars, a lot of families actually broke up, which is very sad. I wonder if that was the same throughout the history of humankind, but it just doesn't seem right to me. Uh, a lot of the book also talks about internet environment. And what I love, one of the
Mhm.
messages I love in the book is that we are transferring some of the ways we interact with people on internet, which is two-dimensional, into our everyday life. So would you elaborate on what makes the internet environment so much worse for polarization?
Yeah. Well, like you said, and like I talk about, the internet is two-dimensional, right? It doesn't, there's no nuance. It's flat. And so we kind of have this, we've picked up this habit where we can see something we don't like, and then we just click a button and it's gone forever, right? So you're just scrolling through and you're like, ew, I don't like that. And if you want, you can leave a mean comment, or you can block them, you're done. Like that is your interaction with that person, with that space, with that content. And so we've trained our brains to be able to have these two-dimensional breaks in a relationship. So now we're let's say we're best friends, from grade school, and we're having a conversation. You say something I don't like, and now in my brain I have this connection point where I can be like, "Oh, well, I'm done now." Right?
Mm.
And that's not how relationships work. And so I think when we look at polarization globally, like the internet is playing such a huge role because it is giving us this constant sort of like feedback that it's okay to just see something we don't like and then disappear it and then move on and then build an entire algorithm and an entire structure where we only see things we agree with. We only see people like us. We only see things we want to see, and that's okay to build that world in that way. And I think it's incredibly dangerous because when you're trying to fight polarization, you need some overlap. You need that disagreement. You need diversity. You need these things. And so I think our internet brain tells us, okay, one wrong thing and I can disengage, and that's a valid response. But I think our real lives tell us everything is nuance, right? Everything has depth, and we don't know why someone did something. We don't know what these things, and we don't like there's layers and layers and layers. And so I think
Mm.
it's definitely an uphill battle that we're gonna be fighting with.
The one part of the book which made me slow down and actually think, many parts, but one in particular in this context, was the story about this flat earther. Earthers convention. Now, for those who haven't read the book, the idea that came from that episode was that sometimes people agree with outlandish, crazy even ideas just because they
Mhm.
need to belong. So
Yeah.
it- that was such a striking idea. I was actually thinking of including into my next essay on psychology. So with your permission.
Yes. Yes, yes, please.
um, and another part which I wanted to ask you about is this pressure to do everything right and also pressure to have an opinion, because I personally have had experiences where, as a person with a little bit of the audience, I am sometimes expected to express my opinion and I might not have one or not ready to express one.
Hmm.
So how do you have you resolved the situation for yourself? You did share your personal struggle with people expecting that you express yourself, and you maybe not wanting to express yourself or not having digested it enough.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the two things there that you brought up are so much of what drive our behavior, right? Like humans will do almost anything to have a sense of belonging, right? Like that's what we're tribal, we're communal people, and so we want to belong. So a flat Earth conference, a church, a soccer team, a mom's club, whatever. Like we want to find something that we can belong to. And I think what happens after that sometimes is there's a temptation to sort of go along with the ideas and the beliefs of our group so that we don't feel left out of the group, right? That's why that man was like, whatever, like I'll say whatever about the earth because these are my friends, you know what I mean? Um, but I think sometimes in even progressive circles, where we think maybe we're not doing that, but we are because we're pressuring people to align with us on every single topic and issue. And you kind of mentioned like the war that's happening in Israel. And I remember very early on getting messages on social media like, why haven't you said anything? And I'm like, I don't know anything. Like, I really
Mhm.
am pretty uninformed on like historic like I like that, and there was pressure to sort of align myself with one side or the other based on just like what friends of mine like thought and what people. And I remember sitting in and having a conversation with some friends and I'm like, this feels like weird because I kind of feel like this is what I should say, but I only feel that because people who I would generally agree with on other things are saying it. I haven't done any research. I haven't like looked into it on my own. I just feel like I should say this. And that was a moment again where I was like, that struck me because I'm paying attention. I'm like, why do I feel why do I feel the urge to say something that I don't know fully or like feel confident in just because I don't want to be on the outs of like this group or I don't want to take my time or I just feel like I should have an answer. Um,
Mhm.
and that's a hard thing to resist, but a really good thing to resist, I think,
Mm.
because then it allows us to take our time. And I ended up like finding some things online and messaging with people and having some conversations I would have never had if I just like reshared something and I was like, yeah, I'm with it. I believe what they believe, right? Then it allowed me to do my own investigation and be like, oh, okay, like I think now I can understand more and I've had these conversations. And so I think it's wild that we would assume that we have opinions on everything, right? Or that we have information. Some things come up in the world and I'm like, oh, I think I need a little time to research that. Or I think I don't know yet. Or can you tell me more about that? Right? It's something I always say if someone's pressuring me to like I'm like, tell me how you arrived where you are. Like, I want to take in the information, and I also want that to be okay for people to say, I don't know, you know?
And you do talk quite a lot about the Black Lives Matter movement and how it has changed some people's behavior. And of course, I don't want to give all the spoilers about the book. There are very deep layers of that conversation. I do, considering that I live in Europe and I'm not
Mhm.
always aware of what's happening in US, I have personally also felt the pressure where I'm expected to express an opinion about something that I haven't even heard because it's just not in
Mhm.
my newsroom.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
Yet you do that because you kind of understand that this is the opinion that's expected from you, and you're afraid of being cancelled. So I couldn't, of course, avoid this topic in today's interview. So what's the problem with canceling, or as you say, sometimes it becomes annihilation? And
Hmm.
I actually love this idea of making a difference between consequences and total annihilation of a
Hmm.
well, human being. So and as an afterthought, you don't have to answer that. Did you get any backlash for your opinions in this book? Because you might have ruffled quite a few feathers.
Yeah, yeah. I thought that. I was like, I'm gonna write this book about cancel culture and then I'm gonna get canceled. But I think and I talk about like, the difference between consequences and punishments or um and I think there are obviously consequences for actions and accountability, and I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think when it comes to things like cancel culture, we add an element of shame that I think doesn't have to be there for consequences or doesn't always have to be there for accountability. And so when we see someone and they make a mistake, especially a mistake out of just not knowing, then I think, okay, well, what do we really want? This is what I talk about in the book, and I say with people in my life who I see and um, I disagree with, do I want them to change their mind or do I want them to feel embarrassed? And sometimes I want them to feel embarrassed, and that's a check to myself to be like, okay, okay, we might need to check in. Because what I want to be is I want to be a person who wants them to change their mind. But, I think if you notice, like, I've even heard from people I know, like, comments on social media that's like, that's what you get, or like, I hope you're enjoying this. And I'm like, Oh, uh-oh. You know what I mean? This isn't good. We should want people to be healthy and thriving and free. Um, and I think right now, um, I'm seeing a lot of people who are like, I want you to feel embarrassed and I want you to feel ashamed. And that's not
Mhm.
accountability. That's like you said, annihilation. And so it's a very fine line, but we need to be finding it because I think I was just telling this to a friend the other day. I'm like, here in the US, I want everyone to have the opportunity to change their mind at any time. I think it should be okay if you said, like, okay, I thought this was going to work and it's not working and I want to find a way to fix it. What I don't want to say is, well, you thought this was going to work and that's dumb. And so you should never be happy again. And I'm like, but that's the narrative online, right? That's like, we buy into that. And so trying to resist the shame and move into the accountability.
I just noticed that I actually talked way over my normal time, but I will ask I will have asked one question, which I wanted to ask, and then my usual questions. Sorry, guys,
Okay.
we just got into this very relevant conversation for today's world, which is all coming from this book. We only covered a little bit of the book, so do get yourself a copy and enjoy your weekend. It is enjoyable read and light in a way that it is nice to read because it's stories, it's personal stories, it's very understandable, but it's not light because you will start questioning things a mirror, so it will make you think deep. So what I wanted to ask is, as a pastor, you see a lot of people, real people. How much of that internet, two-dimensional internet communication has moved over into the real world, where we sometimes don't realize that this is not an avatar; it's a real human being in front of me.
Yeah, so much of that. And I think it's gosh, I think it's one of the biggest issues that we face today as humanity because we are fed so many images constantly and constantly and constantly in videos and these things of people who are so far on the other side that we're able to start to see them in that way. And something I say a lot is that the minute you begin to other someone, the last domino to fall is violence, right? So the minute that we can start saying like, well, you're not really, well, you're the other team, and then that moves to like, well, and then we see how eventually that always leads to like, well, you're not fully human, or well, you're not, and it ends with violence. And so it's so important that we are able to, even if we disagree, even if we think someone's wrong, even if we think what they're doing is harmful, we still have to acknowledge their humanity, because if not, I think it's going to put us in a really bad spot.
Thank you. And I do ask a few traditional questions usually. And
Okay.
one of them, if you were to give one, two, or three, any number, one, two, or three tips to people who are listening to this interview now or in recording later, what they can do right now to start changing this crazy, noisy, angry, polarizing world.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Number one, I would say set some boundaries with the noise. So boundaries with social media, boundaries with the news, boundaries with media in general, and find like a good rhythm. And number two, I would say trust yourself. That's like my biggest piece of advice. It's just like if you can get quiet, like you probably know what feels right for you to do in any situation. And I think that I just would do those too.
That's great. Sometimes it's good to have only two,
Okay, okay,
more
okay.
memorizable boundaries and trust yourself. In fact,
Yes.
maybe your next book could be on trusting yourself. I think you have cracked something there
Yeah,
about
yeah, that's true. Yeah,
your
I gotta
relationship
take
with
some
yourself.
notes after this. Yeah.
Uh, so I'll do the traditional closing before I ask the last question. So first of all, guys, the book, if you are not part of Mindvalley Book Club, then sign up because we send weekly overviews of the best new releases, and we go through hundreds of books and only highlight 3 to 5 books. And then of those books, we pick one after rigorous reading by a few pro readers, one for the interview, which we announced to be be the book of the week. So this is today's book of the week. And then you get to meet our wonderful authors and have a chat with them. Well, if you dare to leave questions, you can have a chat. Or otherwise, I will have a chat. Obviously, I have so much to ask. Now, on a more serious note, I want to ask those who are online to leave a heart for my guests, as usual, and those who are watching it in recording to leave a heart under the video. They do matter so much, so do leave your hearts. And the question to Brit, how would you like your book to change the world?
Oh my gosh. I think honestly, what you said earlier was like the most beautiful thing I think I've heard. I would love for it to be a mirror, and I would love for people to be able to see themselves more clearly having read it.
Thank you so much. It is already that. And yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. So warmly recommend. Thank you guys for joining me and see you on my next interview. And thank you, Brit, for spending this time with us. Bye
Thank
bye.
you.